The alarm clock's sharp ring cut through the pre-dawn silence at exactly 5:30 in the morning. Sergeant Michael Thompson rolled out of bed with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been following military routines for over 15 years. His small apartment near Windsor Castle was sparse but comfortable, decorated only with a few family photos and his collection of military commendations. As he moved through his morning routine, his mind was already focused on the day. Ahead today was special, though Michael tried not to let his anticipation show too much. After 3 years of regular ceremonial duties, he had grown accustomed to the routine of the changing of the guard. Tourists came and went. Cameras flashed, and he and his fellow guards performed their ancient ritual with precision and dignity. But today, a group was coming that had been planning this visit for months, and Michael had volunteered to make sure everything went perfectly. Thunder. His black gelding was already awake when Michael arrived at the royal stables. The horse's ears perked up at the sound of his approaching footsteps, and he nickered softly in greeting. Thunder had been Michael's partner for 2 years now, and they had developed the kind of wordless communication that comes only with time and trust. The horse seemed to sense when days were different from the ordinary routine. "Morning, old boy," Michael murmured as he began the careful process of grooming. He ran the currycomb through Thunder's thick winter coat, working out any tangles and dirt from the previous day. The repetitive motion was soothing for both man and horse, a meditative start to what he hoped would be a memorable day. Thunder stood perfectly still, occasionally turning his head to watch Michael work, his dark eyes intelligent and alert. The grooming process was more than just practical preparation. It was a bonding ritual that reinforced their partnership. Michael checked every inch of Thunder's body for cuts, swelling, or any signs of discomfort. He cleaned the horse's hooves carefully, picking out small stones and debris. Thunder lifted each foot willingly, a sign of the complete trust that had developed between them. This daily routine had become so natural that Michael could perform it even when his mind was elsewhere. But today he found himself paying extra attention to every detail as he worked. Michael thought about the letter that had arrived at the castle 3 months earlier. Cube Sarah Martinez, the activities coordinator at Sunshine House, had written with such genuine hope and careful planning that it had moved everyone who read it. She had explained how the residents had been learning about British history and traditions, and how seeing the changing of the guard had become their collective dream. Some of the residents had never been outside their local community, and this visit represented months of fundraising and careful preparation. The ceremonial tack came next, each piece polished to a mirror shine. Michael lifted the heavy saddle onto Thunder's back, adjusting it with the precision that came from years of practice. The breastplate, crupper, and bridle followed, each buckle checked and double-checked. Thunder accepted each piece of equipment with patient dignity, understanding that this formal gear meant they would be performing their most important duties. Other guards were arriving now, their footsteps echoing in the stone corridors of the stable block. Corporal James Reed appeared at the neighboring stall, already halfway through saddling his bay mare, Sterling. James was newer to the regiment, having joined just 18 months earlier, but he had quickly proven himself to be both reliable and genuinely caring about their public duties. His horse, Sterling, was more spirited than Thunder, but equally well-trained. "Big day today," James commented, as he adjusted Sterling's girth. "I read the file on our visitors. Some of them have been planning this trip for almost a year." Michael nodded, running his hand along Thunder's neck. "Sarah Martinez called yesterday to confirm all the details. She sounded so grateful that we're making special accommodations. Apparently one of the residents, a boy named Jamie, has been talking about horses nonstop since they planned this visit." Private William Foster joined them, leading his chestnut gelding Majesty from his stall. William was the youngest of the three, but his genuine enthusiasm for their ceremonial duties made him a favorite among visitors. Majesty had a gentle temperament that made him particularly good with children and nervous tourists. The 3 guards had worked together for over a year now, and their horses had become accustomed to each other's presence and rhythms. The morning briefing was more detailed than usual. Captain Harrison, their commanding officer, had spent considerable time coordinating with Sunshine House to understand the specific needs of their visitors. Some of the residents used wheelchairs, others had sensory sensitivities. Several had intellectual disabilities that meant they might need extra time to process what was happening around them. The guards would need to be more flexible than usual, ready to adapt their routine if necessary. Remember, Captain Harrison emphasized, these visitors have been looking forward to this day for months. Some of them may never have an opportunity like this again. I want you to make it special, but also keep it authentic. They're here to see the real ceremony, not a watered-down version. Michael appreciated this approach. He had seen too many well-meaning attempts to help special needs, individuals that ended up being patronizing or artificial, as they led their horses toward the courtyard. Michael reflected on his own experiences with people with disabilities. His younger sister, Rebecca, had been born with cerebral palsy, and he had grown up understanding that different didn't mean less capable. Rebecca had taught him to look beyond surface differences and recognize the full humanity in everyone he met. Those lessons had shaped his approach to military service and his interactions with the public. The castle was beginning to stir with activity. Kitchen staff were preparing for the day's events. Gardeners were tending to the flower beds that would provide a beautiful backdrop for photographs. And security personnel were reviewing their procedures for the special visit. Everyone seemed to understand that today required a little extra attention to detail. Thunder's shoes rang against the cobblestones as they entered the main courtyard. The early morning light was perfect, casting everything in a golden glow that would make beautiful photographs. Michael could already envision the joy on the visitors' faces when they saw the horses and guards in their full ceremonial regalia. He had seen that look countless times before, but it never got old. Other members of the regiment were arriving now, each leading their perfectly groomed horses. The horses themselves seemed to sense the importance of the day. Their ears were alert, their steps were high and proud, and they carried themselves with the dignity that came from months of careful training and daily interaction with admiring visitors. Michael checked his watch and felt a flutter of anticipation. In less than 2 hours, the residents of Sunshine House would arrive at the castle gates. He had no way of knowing yet how profoundly this day would affect not just the visitors but himself and his fellow guards. The careful preparation, the attention to detail, and the genuine desire to create something special were all about to culminate in moments of pure human connection that would be remembered for years to come. As he made final adjustments to Thunder's bridle, Michael smiled to himself. Sometimes the most important duties were the ones that never made it into official reports or commendations. Sometimes the greatest honor came from simply being present for someone else's moment of joy. The white minibus with Sunshine House painted cheerfully on its side pulled through the castle gates at exactly 10 o'clock. Sarah Martinez sat in the front passenger seat, clipboard in hand, checking and rechecking her carefully prepared list of residents and their specific needs. She had been awake since 4 in the morning, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This visit represented months of planning, fundraising, and coordination, and she desperately wanted everything to go perfectly for her residents. Behind her, the bus buzzed with barely contained excitement. Jamie pressed his face against the window, his breath fogging the glass as he tried to get his first glimpse of the horses he had been dreaming about for weeks. "Horses? I see horses," he announced loudly, his voice carrying the pure joy that came with his Down syndrome. His excitement was infectious, and several other residents crowded around the windows to see what had captured his attention. Emma sat near the back of the bus, her hands pressed firmly over her ears. The combination of engine noise, excited chatter, and the unfamiliar environment was already overwhelming her sensitive nervous system. Mrs. Patterson, the primary caregiver, sat beside her with a bag full of comfort items, including Emma's favorite stress ball and a pair of noise-canceling headphones. "It's okay, sweetie," she said softly. "Remember, we practiced this. When we get off the bus, we'll find a quiet spot to get our bearings." Marcus, a 22-year-old with intellectual disabilities, sat quietly in a seat, but his eyes were bright with curiosity. He had spent hours the night before reading about horses in picture books, preparing for this moment. His caregiver, David, had helped him write down questions he wanted to ask if he got the chance to meet any of the guards. The list written, in Marcus's careful handwriting, was folded neatly in his jacket pocket. As the bus came to a stop, Sarah stood up and addressed her group with the same calm, encouraging tone she had perfected over her 10 years of working with special needs individuals. Remember, everyone, we practice this. We'll get off the bus slowly, stay with our buddies, and listen for instructions. The guards here are very nice people who want to make sure we have a wonderful time. The first person off the bus was Tommy, a veteran resident of Sunshine House who had been living there for over a decade. At 35, he had Down syndrome and had developed remarkable social skills over the years. He often served as an unofficial helper with newer residents, and today he had appointed himself as the welcoming committee. "Thank you for letting us visit your castle," he said politely to the security guard who was checking their group in. His formal politeness made everyone smile. Lucy came next, her motorized wheelchair humming quietly as her mother, who had taken the day off work too, accompanied the group, walked beside her. Lucy's cerebral palsy affected her motor control, but her mind was sharp, and her sense of humor was legendary among the Sunshine House staff. She had programmed several jokes into her communication device specifically for this trip, including one about horses that she was eager to share with anyone who would listen. The process of getting everyone off the bus and organized took nearly 20 minutes. Some residents needed assistance with mobility equipment. Others required a few moments to adjust to the new environment. And a few were so excited that they needed gentle reminding about staying with the group. Sarah and her team of 6 caregivers moved with practiced efficiency, but never rushed anyone. Michael watched the arrival from his position near the stables, and he felt his heart warm at the sight. The genuine excitement and wonder on the faces of the residents reminded him why he had joined the Royal Guard in the first place. It wasn't just about the ceremony or the tradition. It was about serving something larger than himself and bringing joy to others through that service. As the group made their way toward the courtyard, Michael noticed immediately that the usual crowd of tourists was already beginning to gather. Saturday mornings were always busy at Windsor Castle, and the changing of the guard drew visitors from around the world. Camera-wielding tourists jostled for the best positions, tour guides spoke in multiple languages, and children ran around excitedly. For most visitors, this energy was part of the fun, but Michael realized it might be overwhelming for some of their special guests. Emma was the first to show signs of distress. The combination of voices, footsteps on cobblestones, camera shutters, clicking, and the general bustle of a busy tourist attraction was too much for her autism-sensitive nervous system. She began rocking back and forth, her hands pressed tightly over her ears, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Mrs. Patterson immediately moved to her side, speaking in the calm, soothing voice that usually helped Emma through difficult moments. Other residents were having different reactions to the crowds. Some, like Tommy, seemed energized by all the activity and began waving at other tourists and trying to start conversations. Marcus appeared confused and a bit frightened by the chaos, moving closer to his caregiver David and asking repeatedly when they would see the horses. Jamie's excitement had reached such a peak that he was having trouble staying still, bouncing on his toes and calling out, "Where are the horses?"
Where are the horses?
At increasing volume, Sarah felt her carefully laid plans beginning to unravel. She had visited the castle twice during the planning process, but both times had been on quiet weekday mornings. She hadn't fully anticipated how overwhelming the Saturday crowd would be for some of her residents. She began mentally reviewing their backup plans and wondering if they should retreat to a quieter area until the ceremony began. It was at this crucial moment that Michael made a decision that would change everything. He had been watching the group's arrival with growing concern, particularly Emma's obvious distress and the way several other residents seemed to be struggling with the crowd. He glanced at his fellow guards, James and William, and saw the same concern reflected in their faces. "We need to do something," he said quietly to James as they stood beside their horses. "Look at that young woman with her hands over her ears, the boy asking about horses. He's getting more upset by the minute." James nodded, following Michael's gaze. "What are you thinking?" Michael looked at his watch. They had 30 minutes before the official ceremony was scheduled to begin. What if we brought them over here away from the crowd? Let them meet the horses properly before all the formal stuff starts. The idea was simple, but potentially complicated. Royal protocol was specific about interactions with the public, and any deviation from standard procedures required careful consideration. But as Michael watched, Emma's distress increasing and saw the disappointment beginning to creep into some of the other residents' faces. He knew they had to try something different. William had overheard their conversation and moved closer. He said without hesitation. My little cousin has autism, and crowds can be really tough for him too. If we can make this easier for them, we should. The three guards looked at each other, and in that moment, it made a collective decision that would transform a routine, ceremonial duty into something extraordinary. Michael began walking toward the group, his boots clicking confidently against the cobblestones. Thunder followed behind him, the horses training, making him responsive to even the slightest pressure from the lead rope. As Michael approached Sarah Martinez, he could see the worry in her eyes and the way she was trying to manage multiple challenging situations at once. Excuse me, Michael said politely, his voice carrying the calm authority that came with his military training. I'm Sergeant Thompson. I understand your group has been looking forward to visiting us today, Luth flickering across her face at his professional but warm demeanor. Yes, we have, but I'm afraid the crowds are a bit more than some of our residents expected. Michael nodded understandingly, glancing at Emma, who was still struggling with the sensory overload. I have an idea that might help, he said. What if we could arrange a quieter meeting with the horses before the official ceremony begins? We have a more private area where your residents could interact with us and the horses without all the crowd noise. Sarah's eyes widened with hope and gratitude. Would that really be possible? It would make such a difference for several of our residents. The decision was made in that moment, though none of them fully realized how significant it would prove to be. As Michael turned to signal his fellow guards, he caught sight of Jamie's face pressed against the bus window, still fogged with his excited breathing. The boy was pointing at Thunder and saying something to another resident with such enthusiasm that it was impossible not to smile. What happened next would exceed everyone's expectations and create memories that would last far beyond this single morning. But for now, it was simply a sergeant, his horse, and a group of special visitors, who were about to discover that sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when people choose kindness over protocol. The private courtyard behind the main ceremonial area was a world away from the growing crowds of tourists. Ancient stone walls rose on three sides, covered with ivy that had been growing there for decades. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow on the worn cobblestones. It was here that Michael led Thunder, followed by James with Sterling and William with Majesty. The three horses moved with the measured dignity that came from months of ceremonial training. But their ears were alert with curiosity about this change in routine. Sarah Martinez felt a wave of relief wash over her as she guided her group into this peaceful space. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Emma's shoulders began to relax as the overwhelming noise of the crowds faded to a distant murmur. The enclosed space felt safe and manageable, and several residents who had been showing signs of anxiety began to look around with renewed interest. This is much better, Mrs. Patterson whispered to Sarah as Emma slowly lowered her hands from her ears. Yes. She's actually looking at the horses now, instead of trying to block everything out. Indeed, Emma had noticed Thunder standing calmly beside Michael, and her fascination with the large, gentle animal was beginning to overcome her sensory overwhelm. Jamie could barely contain himself. The moment he saw Thunder up close, he began bouncing on his toes and clapping his hands together. Horse. Big horse. Can I pet? His excitement was so pure and infectious that Michael found himself grinning despite his usual ceremonial composure. Let's take it slow, Jamie, Michael said gently. Thunder likes to meet new friends carefully. Michael demonstrated the proper way to approach a horse, moving slowly and speaking in calm, quiet tones. Always let him see you coming, he explained, his voice carrying easily in the enclosed space. Hold your hand out like this so he can smell you first. Jamie watched with intense concentration. his usual impulsiveness controlled by his deep desire to do everything right. Thunder, as if sensing the special nature of this encounter, lowered his great head toward Jamie's outstretched hand. The boy's sharp intake of breath was audible as the horse's soft muzzle touched his palm. "He's so soft," Jamie exclaimed, his voice filled with wonder. "And warm. He's really warm." Michael smiled, watching the natural connection forming between boy and horse. "That's right. And see how his ears are forward? That means he likes you." Marcus had been hanging back from the group, his usual shyness made worse by the unfamiliar environment. But as he watched Jamie's successful interaction with Thunder, his curiosity began to overcome his nervousness. David, his caregiver, noticed Marcus's interest and gently encouraged him. "Would you like to meet one of the other horses, Marcus?" "Yes. I think that brown one is looking at you." Corporal Reed had been watching this interaction and stepped forward with Sterling. "This is Sterling," he said to Marcus, his voice warm and patient. She's actually a lady horse, which makes her a mare. Would you like to learn about her?" Marcus nodded eagerly, his face lighting up with the joy of learning something new. He had always been fascinated by facts and details, and James seemed to instinctively understand this about him. "Sterling is 7 years old," James continued, running his hand along the mare's neck. "She was born in Ireland and came to us when she was 3. See this white marking on her forehead? That's called a star. Every horse's markings are different, like fingerprints on people." Marcus listened intently, absorbing every detail. "Can I touch her star?" he asked hesitantly. "Of course," James replied. "Just move slowly and gently." Meanwhile, William had noticed Lucy in her wheelchair, positioned slightly apart from the group. Her communication device was resting on her lap, and she was typing something with careful deliberation. William approached with majesty, whose calm temperament made him perfect for this kind of interaction. "Hello," he said warmly. "I'm William, and this is Majesty. Would you like to meet him?" Lucy's face broke into a radiant smile, and she quickly typed a response on her device. The electronic voice spoke her words. "Hello, William." "Hello, Majesty. Horse very beautiful." William knelt down beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Thank you. Majesty is very proud of how he looks. Would you like to feel how soft his coat is?" The magic of the moment was beginning to unfold naturally. Tommy, ever the social ambassador, had appointed himself as the group's official greeter and was moving between the horses, introducing himself to each one with elaborate courtesy. "Good morning, Mr. Horse," he said to Thunder, with a formal bow. "My name is Tommy, and I live at Sunshine House. Thank you for letting us visit your castle." Some of the residents were content to observe from a distance, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells of this new environment. The scent of hay and leather, the quiet sounds of horses breathing and shifting their weight, and the gentle voices of the guards created an atmosphere of calm focus that was perfect for their needs. Emma, who had been so distressed by the crowds, found herself drawn to the rhythmic breathing of the horses. The steady, predictable sound seemed to regulate her own nervous system, and she began to move closer to Sterling without even realizing it. Mrs. Patterson watched in amazement as Emma, who usually needed significant support in new environments, began to relax and engage with her surroundings. Michael looked around at the scene developing in the courtyard and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what service was really about, not just the ceremony and tradition, but the human connections that made those ceremonies meaningful. Each resident was having their own unique experience, but all of them were being treated with dignity and respect. The horses themselves seemed to understand the special nature of their visitors. Thunder stood perfectly still as Jamie continued to pet his neck, the large horse's patience remarkable. Sterling allowed Marcus to examine every piece of her tack with fascination, and Majesty lowered his head so that Lucy could reach him more easily from her wheelchair as the interactions continued. The guards began to learn about their visitors. As individuals, Jamie loved to talk about his job in the Sunshine House kitchen, where he helped prepare meals for everyone. Marcus was fascinated by military history and had read every book in the local library about the Royal Guards. Lucy had an incredible sense of humor and had already programmed a joke about horses into her communication device that made everyone laugh. The caregivers watched with growing amazement as their residents, many of whom struggled with new social situations, began to open up and engage with confidence. The guards' genuine interest and respect was creating an environment where everyone felt valued and important. Time seemed to slow down in the peaceful courtyard. What had been planned as a brief introduction was evolving into something much more meaningful. The guards were discovering that their visitors had as much to offer as they hoped to receive, and the residents were experiencing the kind of authentic acceptance that could be life-changing as the minutes passed. It became clear that this was just the beginning of something special. The real ceremony hadn't even started yet, but already bonds were forming that would make the official changing of the guard feel like a celebration among friends, rather than a performance for strangers. 20 minutes into their private meeting, something remarkable was happening in the secluded courtyard. The formal barriers between the royal guards and their special visitors had completely dissolved, placed by genuine human connections that surprised everyone involved. Michael found himself sitting on a stone bench with Jamie, who was chattering excitedly about everything he knew about horses, while Thunder stood patiently beside them, occasionally nuzzling the boy's shoulder. "I have a book about horses," Jamie was saying, his words tumbling over each other in his enthusiasm. "It has pictures of all different kinds, black ones and brown ones and spotted ones. But none of them are as beautiful as Thunder." He paused and looked up at Michael with serious eyes. "Does Thunder get lonely? Because I get lonely sometimes, but then I remember all my friends at Sunshine House." Michael felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thunder has lots of friends," he replied gently. "All the other horses here and all the guards who take care of him, and now he has you as a friend too." Jamie's face lit up with such pure joy that Michael had to look away for a moment to compose himself. Across the courtyard, James was having an equally profound experience with Marcus. The young man had pulled out his carefully prepared list of questions and was working through them with methodical determination. "What does Sterling eat for breakfast?" he asked, reading from his paper. James explained about hay and oats and special supplements, but Marcus wanted details about quantities, timing, and storage procedures. His genuine interest and careful attention to every answer impressed James more than he could express. "You know a lot about horses already, James?" observed as Marcus asked his seventh detailed question. "Have you thought about working with animals?" Marcus's face flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "I help take care of the rabbits at Sunshine House," he said proudly. "Sometimes I feed the birds in the garden. Sarah says I'm very gentle with animals." William was discovering that Lucy had an incredibly sharp sense of humor, despite her communication challenges. She had programmed a series of horse-related jokes into her device and was delivering them with perfect timing. "Why don't horses wear underwear?" her electronic voice asked. William played along, pretending to think hard about the question. "Because they would be horse shorts," came the punchline, and Lucy's delighted laughter was contagious enough to make everyone in the courtyard smile. But it was Emma's transformation that was perhaps the most remarkable. The young woman who had been so overwhelmed by sensory input was now standing beside Sterling, her hand resting on the mare's neck, breathing in sync with the horse's steady rhythm. The predictable, calming presence of the animal had somehow reset her nervous system, and she was more relaxed than Mrs. Patterson had seen her in months. "She's never been this calm in a new place," Mrs. Patterson whispered to Sarah, both women watching in amazement as Emma began to stroke Sterling's coat with slow, deliberate movements. Usually it takes hours for her to adjust to any change in routine. Sarah nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough moment she had hoped for, but never dared to expect. Tommy had appointed himself as the official photographer, asking everyone to pose for pictures with his disposable camera. The guards willingly participated, helping residents position themselves safely near the horses and making sure everyone who wanted a photo got one. Tommy's natural social skills and genuine enthusiasm were helping to facilitate connections between residents who might otherwise have been too shy to interact. The horses themselves were proving to be remarkable ambassadors. Thunder seemed to understand that Jamie needed extra patience and stood perfectly still, even when the boy's excitement to him moved unpredictably. Sterling appeared to sense Emma's need for calm and barely moved a muscle while the young woman found her comfort zone. Majesty responded to Lucy's communication device by moving his ears forward every time it spoke, as if he was actively listening to her jokes. As the private session continued, the guards began to share stories about their horses and their own experiences. Michael told them about Thunder's training, how the horse had learned to stand perfectly still even when cannons fired during ceremonial occasions. The first time he heard the cannons, he jumped about 3 feet in the air, Michael admitted, making several residents giggle. But now he just flicks his ears like he's saying, "There they go again." James shared how Sterling had once helped comfort a child who had gotten separated from his parents during a castle tour. She just stood there and let him pet her until his parents found him, James explained. Horses are very good at sensing when people need comfort. Marcus nodded solemnly, as if this information confirmed something he had always suspected about. Horses. The caregivers were taking mental notes about what was working so well in this interaction. The guards' natural respect for their visitors, their willingness to slow down and explain things clearly, and their genuine interest in each person as an individual were creating exactly the kind of inclusive environment that brought out the best in people with special needs. David noticed that Marcus was no longer looking anxious about being in an unfamiliar place. Instead, he was asking increasingly sophisticated questions about horse care and training. "How do you teach a horse to march in formation?" Marcus asked, his intellectual curiosity fully engaged. James launched into an explanation of equine training methods. Speaking to Marcus as he would to any genuinely interested adult, Mrs. Patterson observed that Emma was not only calm, but actually initiating interaction for the first time all day. She had begun making soft clicking sounds that Sterling seemed to respond to, and the two had developed their own quiet conversation that needed no words. "I think Sterling likes Emma's sounds," William observed quietly. Horses communicate a lot through body language and soft noises. As their special time in the courtyard continued, it became clear that something unprecedented was happening. The residents weren't just meeting horses and guards. They were being seen and valued as complete individuals with their own interests, personalities, and contributions to make. The guards weren't just performing their duties. They were discovering the profound satisfaction that comes from using their position to create joy and connection. The official ceremony was still 20 minutes away, but already this had become more meaningful than any of them had imagined possible. The foundation was being laid for an experience that would resonate far beyond this single morning, touching lives in ways that none of them could yet fully comprehend. When the time came for the official changing of the guard ceremony, the atmosphere had been completely transformed. What should have been a nerve-wracking experience for the Sunshine House residents had become an anticipated reunion with their new friends. Sarah Martinez couldn't believe the change in her group as they made their way to the prime viewing area that Michael had arranged for them. It's positioned where they could see everything clearly without being overwhelmed by crowds. Jamie practically vibrated with excitement as he spotted Thunder taking his position in the formation. "There's my friend," he called out, waving enthusiastically. Thunder's ears twitched in the direction of Jamie's voice, and Michael had to suppress a smile as he maintained his ceremonial posture. The connection between the boy and the horse had become something special, transcending the usual boundaries of such events. Emma stood beside Mrs. Patterson, no longer needing her noise-canceling headphones. The private time with the horses had somehow prepared her nervous system for the sounds and movements of the ceremony. She watched Sterling with intense focus, as if she was studying every detail of the mare's performance. "Look how she moves," Emma said quietly, one of the few times she had spoken voluntarily all morning, like dancing. Marcus had positioned himself where he could observe the entire ceremony, his questions from earlier now making the formal movements meaningful rather than mysterious. He watched James guide Sterling through the precise formations and whispered explanations to other residents about what they were seeing. "See how they all move together?" he said to Tommy. "That takes lots of practice. James told me they practice every day." The ceremony itself unfolded with its usual precision and pageantry. Drums beat in steady rhythm, commands were called out in crisp military fashion, and the guards performed their intricate movements with the perfection that came from years of training. But for the first time in his career, Michael was acutely aware of his audience in a personal way. These weren't anonymous tourists taking pictures. These were individuals he had met and connected with. Lucy had programmed a special message into her communication device that she activated during a quiet moment in the ceremony. "Thank you for friendship." The words spoken in the device's electronic voice somehow carried more emotional weight than if they had been shouted from the rooftops. William, maintaining his ceremonial posture, felt his chest swell with pride and gratitude. As the formal ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, the guards didn't immediately retreat to the stables as usual. Instead, they lingered. Unwilling to end what had become much more than a professional duty, Michael approached Sarah with a suggestion that surprised even him. "Would your group like to see where the horses live? You could show them the stables and maybe answer more questions." The tour of the royal stables was impromptu but magical. Residents saw where Thunder, Sterling, and Majesty lived when they weren't on ceremonial duty. They learned about horse care, feeding schedules, and the daily routines that kept the animals healthy and happy. Marcus was fascinated by the organization and precision of everything, asking detailed questions about nutrition and exercise regimens that impressed the guards with their sophistication. Jamie wanted to help with everything. When Michael demonstrated how to brush Thunder's coat, Jamie watched with intense concentration, then asked if he could try. Under careful supervision, he ran the soft brush along Thunder's shoulder, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "Am I doing it right?" he asked anxiously. "Perfect," Michael assured him. "Thunder loves being brushed. See how his eyes are half closed? That means he's really enjoying it." Emma discovered that she had a natural instinct for horse behavior. She seemed to understand intuitively when Sterling needed space and when the mare was welcoming interaction. "She's telling us things with her ears," Emma observed. Watching Sterling's expressions change, Mrs. Patterson was amazed by this insight. Emma rarely made such sophisticated social observations about human behavior, but she was reading the horse's communication perfectly. The visit extended far beyond its planned duration, but no one seemed in a hurry to leave. The guards found themselves sharing stories about their military service, their relationships with their horses, and their experiences in ceremonial duties. The residents shared stories about life at Sunshine House, their hobbies and interests, and their dreams for the future. When Tommy mentioned that he was learning to cook in the Sunshine House kitchen, William's face lit up. "I love cooking too," he said. "What's your favorite thing to make?" This led to an animated discussion about recipes and kitchen techniques that bridged their different worlds through shared interests. Lucy had been working on something special on her communication device, and when she finished, she called for everyone's attention. "Thank you, guards and horses, for best day ever. You are heroes to us." The simple message, delivered in the device's electronic voice, carried such sincerity that it brought tears to several caregivers' eyes and made the guards stand a little taller with pride. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that this visit was creating ripple effects beyond what anyone had anticipated. Other castle staff members had noticed the extended interaction and began stopping by to meet the residents. The head groom shared stories about the horses' personalities and quirks. Kitchen worker brought out fresh apples that the horses could eat as treats, showing the residents how to offer them safely. The photography session that followed was unlike anything the guards had ever experienced during their regular duties. Instead of quick tourist snapshots, these photos captured genuine relationships. Jamie posed proudly beside Thunder, his arm around the horse's neck as if they were old friends. Emma stood calmly next to Sterling, both of them seeming to understand each other on some deeper level. Marcus held up a piece of horse tack, explaining its function to the camera with the confidence of someone who had truly learned something new. When it finally came time for the group to leave, the goodbyes were emotional and heartfelt. Jamie hugged Thunder's neck and whispered something into the horse's ear that made Michael smile. Emma gave Sterling one final pat and said quietly, "Thank you for being calm with me." Marcus shook hands formally with each of the guards, thanking them for teaching him so much about horses and military service. The guards found themselves exchanging contact information with Sarah Martinez, not for any official purpose, but because They genuinely wanted to stay connected with this remarkable group. "Please let us know how everyone is doing," Michael said as he walked the group back to their bus. "If you ever want to plan another visit, we'll make sure it's just as special." As the Sunshine House bus pulled away from the castle, windows filled with waving hands and smiling faces, the three guards stood in the courtyard feeling fundamentally changed by their experience. What had started as a routine ceremonial duty had become a profound reminder of why they had chosen to serve in the first place. "I don't think I'll ever look at our ceremonies the same way," James admitted as they began leading their horses back to the stables. "Knowing that it can mean so much to people like that, it makes everything we do feel more important." William nodded in agreement, still moved by Lucy's final message of gratitude. Michael looked back at the courtyard where, just hours before, such meaningful connections had been formed. The cobblestones looked the same, the ivy still climbed. The ancient walls and the morning light was shifting toward afternoon shadows. But something essential had changed, and he knew that both the guards and the residents would carry this experience with them for years to come. That evening, as Michael groomed Thunder after their long day, he found himself talking to the horse. About their visitors? "You were perfect today, old friend," he said, running the brush through Thunder's dark coat. "I think you made some dreams come true." Thunder turned his head to look at Michael, and for a moment the man could have sworn the horse understood exactly what he meant. 3 weeks after the visit, Michael received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of Thunder, created by Jamie with help from the art therapy program at Sunshine House. The horse was depicted in bright crayon colors, with an enormous smile that horses don't actually have, but which perfectly captured Jamie's joy. Attached was a note in Jamie's careful handwriting. "Dear Sergeant Michael and Thunder, thank you for the best day of my life. I think about you every day. Love, Jamie." The drawing now hung in Michael's small apartment, but copies had also been made for the stable office and the guards' common room. Other guards would stop and ask about the colorful picture, and Michael found himself telling the story over and over again. Each retelling seemed to inspire other members of the regiment to think differently about their interactions with the public at Sunshine House. The impact of the castle visit was equally profound and long-lasting. Who had struggled with new environments and sensory overwhelm for years had experienced a breakthrough that continued to benefit her daily life. The memory of Sterling's calming presence had become a tool that Mrs. Patterson could use to help Emma cope with other challenging situations. "Remember how calm Sterling was?" she would say during difficult moments. "Can you breathe like Sterling breathes?" The success with Emma had been so significant that the care facility's therapists began incorporating horses into their treatment discussions more regularly. They arranged visits to local stables and riding programs, building on the foundation of confidence that had been established during that magical morning at Windsor Castle. Emma's parents, who had been struggling to find effective therapies for their daughter's anxiety, saw improvements that lasted for months. Marcus had transformed the experience into a comprehensive research project. With David's help, he had created a detailed scrapbook about the Royal Guards, their horses, and British military traditions. He had written letters to James, who had responded with photographs and additional information about Sterling's training and daily care. Marcus's newfound confidence in his own learning abilities had spread to other areas of his life, and he had enrolled in a community college course about animal care. Lucy's sense of humor had been supercharged by the positive response her jokes had received from the guards. She had programmed an entire repertoire of new material into her communication device and had become the unofficial entertainment coordinator for Sunshine House events. Her confidence in social situations had grown dramatically, and she was now often the first to welcome new residents and help them feel comfortable. Jamie's experience had sparked an interest in military history that surprised everyone. He had checked out every book about horses and soldiers from the local library and had become something of an expert on ceremonial traditions. His caregivers were amazed by his sustained attention to learning, which had previously been challenging. For him, he had even written a story about Thunder that was published in Sunshine House's monthly newsletter. The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate participants. Sarah Martinez had documented the visit thoroughly and shared the story with other care facilities and disability organizations. The positive response led to requests for similar visits. And Windsor Castle began developing a formal program for hosting special needs groups. Other royal residences across Britain took notice and began implementing their own inclusive programs. Captain Harrison, who had initially approved the special arrangements with some uncertainty, found himself fielding calls from his superiors, who had heard about the success of the visit rather than criticism for deviating from standard protocol. He received commendation for the positive publicity and community engagement that had resulted. The story had been picked up by local media, highlighting the human side of royal traditions and the importance of accessibility in public institutions. 6 months later, Sunshine House was invited to return for a second visit, this time with an expanded group that included residents from 2 other local care facilities. The guards had requested this opportunity specifically, having found their interactions with the special needs community to be among the most rewarding aspects of their service. Michael, James, and William had all volunteered to participate again, and their enthusiasm had spread to other members of the regiment. The second visit built on the success of the first, but it also established new traditions. The guards now kept a supply of horse treats, specifically for special visitors, and they had developed a more structured program that balanced education, interaction, and sensory accommodation. Emma returned and was able to help newer visitors understand how to approach the horses calmly. Marcus came back as a junior expert, sharing his knowledge with younger residents who were meeting the horses for the first time. Jamie's reunion with Thunder was emotional for everyone present. The boy had grown taller in the intervening months, but his enthusiasm for horses had only increased. Thunder seemed to remember him, nickering softly when Jamie approached and immediately lowering his head for the scratches behind his ears that he had learned to love during their first meeting. The program's success led to its adoption as a permanent part of Windsor Castle's community outreach efforts. Other military units across Britain began implementing similar programs, recognizing that their ceremonial duties could serve a larger purpose beyond tradition and tourism. The guards discovered that these interactions brought meaning to their service that they hadn't expected, creating connections between military tradition and community support that benefited everyone involved. Years later, Michael would look back on that first morning as a turning point in his understanding of what it meant to serve others. The medals and commendations he had earned during his military career were important, but the crayon drawing of Thunder that still hung in his apartment represented something deeper. It reminded him that the most significant moments in life often come not from following protocols, but from recognizing opportunities to show kindness and create connections. The story of the royal guards and their horses had become more than just a heartwarming anecdote. It had evolved into a model for how institutions could become more inclusive and how service members could use their positions to create positive change in their communities. The residents of Sunshine House had come to see a ceremony, but they had discovered friendship. The guards had expected to perform their duties, but they had found a new understanding of their purpose. Thunder, Sterling, and Majesty continued their ceremonial duties with the same precision and dignity they had always shown. But now they carried with them the memory of special visitors who had seen them not just as symbols of tradition, but as individual animals worthy of friendship and affection. Sometimes, on quiet mornings before the tourists arrived, the horses would stand in the courtyard where it all began, as if remembering the day when duty became joy and ceremony became celebration. The lasting impact of that morning continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways both large and small. But at its heart, it remained a simple story about the power of kindness, the importance of inclusion, and the magic that happens when people choose to see each other as fellow human beings, deserving of respect and friendship. In a world that often seemed divided by differences, the royal guards and their horses had created a space where those differences became sources of connection rather than separation. The tradition continues today, with new guards and new visitors, but always with the same spirit of openness and genuine care that Michael, James, and William established on that first special morning. And somewhere in the Sunshine House common room, Jamie's original drawing of Thunder still hangs on the wall, a colorful reminder that the most beautiful moments in life often come from the simplest acts of human kindness.